this film was dangerous work. Much of it is badly lighted and uneven. But I have this film here, and I would like to show it to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, American patriots,
this is Madison Square Garden in New York City, and not Berlin nor Nuremberg.
They'd never seen anything like it in New York. They were estimated to be 100,000 people out there. 1,700 police officers in total. It was the largest police presence at any event in New York until 9/11. That's how big this thing was. It really looked like a smaller version of Triumph of the Will.
The people in the hall are supporters of the German-American Bund. At the head of the organization is a man named Fritz Julius Kuhn.
Kuhn is this figure who kind of comes out of nowhere, much in some ways as Hitler does in the 1920s in Germany. Steps out of nowhere and becomes the leader of this political faction.
you all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press as a creature with horns, a cloven hoof, and a long tail.
Fritz Kuhn was at the apex of his power. He thought he was now the Führer of America. It seemed like a dangerous movement that was happening. It seemed like a Nazi movement was happening in America.
Ladies and gentlemen, our national anthem.
The 4th of July is America's most important holiday. It celebrates America's Declaration of Independence against Great Britain and the American Revolution, and this in many ways is the most sacred American holiday from a civic perspective. And it's a day when Americans often do things like barbecue and drink beers together. It's sort of the ultimate expression of American patriotism. So on the 4th of July 1937, the German-American Bund decides that this is a holiday that they can use for their own purposes. At this point, the German-American Bund is only a year old. It's founded in 1936, and it's a very rapidly growing organization. We don't really know how many people are directly involved in this organization, but there's evidence that there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans that are interested in what it has to say. The speeches on this date are not about George Washington and the American Revolution necessarily. They're about praising Hitler and calling upon German Americans to have a closer sort of mental relationship with the changes taking place in Germany.
This minority will be able to move mountains. And that is just what our Jewish friends wish to prevent. They know that the German-American element is justified to claim political representation in our government, and that the day will come no matter who stands in our way.
At this point, Fritz Kuhn is 41 years old. He has been the head of the Bund for a year. He styles himself its Führer.
So historically speaking, we don't know many facts about his life, but we know the story he wants to tell about himself.
Fritz Kuhn was born on May 15, 1896 in Munich, one of several children. During World War I, he enlisted in the German army.
He claims to have served in a machine gun regiment that wins the Iron Cross for heroism in battle, although the battle that he claims to have won it in seems to have changed over time, according to his own account. Kuhn claims after the First World War he becomes a member of what we might call the far-right milieu of the time. So he claims, like many veterans, to have joined the Freikorps in Munich, this far-right violent organization. He claims to have brawled on the streets of Munich with communists, very much like many Freikorps members. He then claims to have been an early member of the NSDAP. Kuhn claims to have been a close associate of Hitler, and he claims to have actually been present for the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923.
With stories about Hitler's failed coup in Munich, Kuhn presents himself as a fascist hero.
Kuhn tries to actually fashion his method of speaking and actually the tactics he uses directly on Hitler. He also tries to emulate Hitler's sort of erratic hand gestures and very passionate form of speaking. And you can imagine in an era where, comedy troupes like the Marx Brothers and Charlie Chaplin are mocking Hitler, Kuhn himself becomes the object of ridicule in a lot of people's minds. But I think that's actually overshadowing the real danger that he poses. American law enforcement's knowledge of the Bund is pretty limited in 1937. They're much more interested in communism and communist infiltration of the labor movement. And so there's this view that the Bund might be kind of an object of scorn or ridicule, but that perhaps doesn't pose a huge threat. And that proves to be just a bad mistake.
Unchallenged, the Bundists gather, even on America's National Day.
In the audience that day, on July 4th, 1937, there was a 32-year-old man. His name, on paper at least, is John C. Metcalf.
This is my father. My father and the people in the Deutscher Markanzer Bund did wear uniforms. They just weren't quite as military looking. Dad wore basically a short tie, a brownish shirt, and black pants. Boom, boom, boom. I know the music. I don't know the words. I don't know the German or American words, but I could hum the whole thing right now if you wanted. It's embedded. There was a time during this period that Dad actually took me to a meeting. There were a lot of flags mixed in, like a mass of flags of swastikas and the American flag. Now, I was told always not to say my name to anybody ever.
John Metcalf took his son with him as a cover.
John Metcalf is an investigative journalist for a Chicago newspaper, and his entire tactic is to essentially go undercover, to infiltrate the groups and organizations that he is writing about. This takes an immense amount of courage in the 1930s.
For several decades, John Metcalf's records from this period lay untouched in the Hoover Library in Stanford, California.
I was one of the first scholars to really dig into these notes. These were one of the most remarkable accounts I had ever seen of what it was like within one of these extremist groups in the 1930s.
Well, I guess my father got into the Bund fairly easily, simply because he spoke perfect German, just like he spoke perfect English, but of course he always spoke perfect German in the Bund. My father's real name wasn't John Charles Metcalf, it was Helmut Siegfried Maria Oberwinter.
John Metcalf emigrated from Dresden to America with his mother and siblings in 1914, at the age of 10. Before the First World War, 20 million Americans had German roots. They are one of the most visible immigrant groups and shape the country's economic and cultural life. But with the First World War, the lives of German-born Americans in their new homeland change.
People no longer dare to say certain things. They no longer dare to speak German in public. And there was such strong pressure to conform socially.
When Dad and his mother and brother and sister came to this country, they still had the name Oberwinter. They decided that at some point they would start using his mother's name, Metcalf, and thereby avoiding the prejudice that was rampant in this country at the time. Dad was just totally patriotic. He was just became totally 100% American. Even when he joined the Bund under, false pretenses.
As a member, Metcalf has access to the Bund offices. The undercover journalist manages to learn more about the so-called Bundesführer.
Fritz Kuhn went to the University of Munich, and he received what was the equivalent of a master's degree in chemistry.
However, Kuhn does conceal one point in his curriculum vitae. During his studies, he stole coats and wallets from his fellow students.
They arrested him and he went to prison for about 6 months or so as a result of this. When he got out in 1924, his father arranged for him to have a job with Reinhold Spitz, a Jewish clothing manufacturer. Spitz noticed after some time that the bolts of cloth were coming up short. So Spitz started looking, and eventually he caught that Kuhn was cutting off sections of the bolts of cloth and smuggling them out of the factory and selling them on the black market. Now, he faced another prison time. Kuhn's father went to Spitz and said, "Please, can you do something? Please have mercy on him." Spitz was generous.
The factory owner not only refrains from pressing charges, but also gives Kuhn money to start a new life.
Kuhn initially tries to move to the United States and is rejected, so he's unable to get a visa to enter the U.S. He then actually moves to Mexico. So Mexico has much less stringent immigration restrictions in this period.
Kuhn has a plan. He wants to immigrate to the USA via Mexico.
I think what's remarkable about Fritz Kuhn is that this is a man who always finds a way to get what he wants, seemingly. When he encounters an obstacle, he seemingly always finds a way to go around it.
Kuhn's plan works out. In 1927, after 3 years in Mexico, he immigrates to the USA with his German wife and their 2 children. They move to Detroit. The car manufacturers there place high value on well-educated Germans. Kuhn applies to the anti-Semitic entrepreneur Henry Ford.
Kuhn got a job working at the Henry Ford Hospital. Given his background in chemistry, he got a job working in the X-ray department.
He was one of 400,000 Germans who came to America between 1919 and 1933.
The immigrants before 1918 and those after 1918 differed mainly in their perception of America and democracy.
The pre-1918 immigrants left the authoritarian German Empire to start a new life in liberal America. They considered themselves Americans. Many fought against Germany in the First World War.
And now in the 1920s and 30s, we have a new wave of immigration. They see themselves as people who are fighting for Germany's true soul in the place of this sort of liberal regime that they see as being imposed upon them at the treaty table of Versailles. And so these are people that see themselves as more German than Americans in many cases.
These immigrants set up their own cultural and political associations. One group was called Teutonia.
They felt like a vanguard of true German sentiment in a hostile America.
Teutonia had its headquarters in Chicago. John Metcalf also lived there.
My father decided to do some private investigations just on his own to see what was going on with the German immigrants to this country.
The anti-Semitic factory owner Henry Ford tolerated the sale of Hitler's Mein Kampf outside his factory gates. The Teutonia members donated the proceeds.
They wanted to honor Hitler, so they pulled some of their money and they sent it to Germany as a birthday gift for Hitler. He wrote back to them, thanking them.
And he prophesied that he would soon need them.
But we don't really know what Kuhn's involvement with a group like Teutonia is. We know that he loses his job at the Ford Motor Company because he's apparently practicing political speeches on the clock. I think here again we see Kuhn biding his time, waiting to see what's going to happen and waiting to make his move. We know that Hitler's knowledge of the United States is actually pretty limited. We have to remember that Hitler never visits the US, he never leaves Europe.
Hitler's view of America is divided. On the one hand, the so-called Jewish threat also emanates from there. On the other, he admires the racism toward the blacks. He's impressed by the country's economic power, but at the same time, he fears it.
He's seen firsthand in World War I what happens when the US enters a war. Whatever side the US is fighting on is going to win, simply because of the industrial capacity that it brings to the table. So Hitler is desperate throughout the 1930s and 40s to keep the US neutral, keep it out of any conflict that's going to emerge.
Shortly after the seizure of power, National Socialist-minded US clubs, such as the Teutonia, contacted Hitler.
Naturally, the NSDAP was very keen to build up a network of confidence and supporters in the USA.
What Hitler and the German Foreign Ministry are looking at is the fact that there's 20 million Americans of German-American descent that certainly are a political force to be reckoned with.
Officially, GAU USA is founded, and a new association, Friends of the New Germany, Freunde des Neuen Deutschlands. Within a very short time, the association has 5,000 members, almost all of them with German passports.
Fritz Kuhn joined the Friends of New Germany Detroit chapter in November of 1934. And he'd become an American citizen by this point and pledged his loyalty to America.
And as a member of the Friends of the New Germany, he also swears allegiance to Hitler. Officially, the association is dedicated to cultural work. Its aim is to promote a good image of the new Germany in America.
Keep in mind, at this point, America still was trying to figure out Hitler and figure out, can we work with him?
So April 1st, 1933, the Nazi Party announces a boycott of Jewish shops in Germany. This is not the type of moderation that many people had hoped Hitler would begin demonstrating. It also sparks an immediate backlash around the world. There are Jewish groups that call for boycotts of German shops and the removal of German goods from major department stores, especially in cities like New York.
They're afraid of the members of the Friends of the New Germany because Nazi propaganda is suddenly appearing in US cities.
The Friends of the New Germany are also a distribution network for propaganda, which since 1933 has mostly landed in large quantities, mainly in New York, via the ships of Norddeutscher Lloyd and other German ships. And it spread from there. The American government was not pleased. It felt it was a serious interference in international political affairs.
The US government around President Roosevelt protests in Berlin and threatens diplomatic consequences.
This actually might end up accomplishing what Hitler doesn't want, which is drawing the US deeper into Europe. It could actually potentially, in the worst case scenario, create the pretext for a war, if Fong begins operating as an American arm of the Nazi Party, so to speak.
Hitler reacts and orders that all German citizens must leave the Friends of the New Germany. Berlin and Washington assume that this has solved the problem.
What they believe is that the Nazi Party itself has enough authority over its followers to order them to simply cease their activities, and that proves to be just a bad mistake. So in 1936, the Friends of the New Germany, the surviving chapters, come together in Buffalo, New York to discuss the future of the organization. Is this group simply going to shut down? Is it going to disappear?
Kuhn saw his chance and decided he was going to film the vacuum.
John Metcalf is also in Buffalo and witnesses Kuhn winning over the audience. He talks enthusiastically about evenings with Hitler and Goering in the Munich Burgerbräu Keller, and claims that he had to leave Germany because, like Hitler, he was politically persecuted.
He has a certain charisma about him that I think to a lot of Bund members reminds them of a young Hitler, reminds them of what they potentially have even seen among the young Nazi leadership.
Kuhn has a master plan for the Bund.
Why not make this a German-American organization? Why not combine the principles of the Third Reich and German heritage with Americanism itself?
Kuhn already has a name prepared, the German-American Bund, Amerika-Deutscher Volksbund. Metcalf later notes, he came on stage as Fritz Kuhn and left it as an American Führer. A new life now begins for him. As the Bundesführer, he moves from Detroit to New York.
This is the era in which tabloid journalism in the US is really taking off in the modern sense. Fritz Kuhn begins appearing in the tabloids, leaving jazz clubs with all these beautiful women, rumored to be his mistresses, including a former Miss America. If nothing else, Kuhn is beginning to sell papers for New York tabloid culture. And this, I think, makes him an almost larger-than-life figure in a lot of people's mind.
in mind, Kuhn had a genius for organization and for business.
Newspaper advertisements, donations from Germany, or contributions from companies. Kuhn makes money this way.
He had members give money from their businesses. Somebody had to make the uniforms. This is where the tailors came in. Somebody had to print their propaganda. This is where printers came in. Somebody do this, somebody had to do that. So he was able to network all of these people into making the Bund a money-making organization.
As in the NSDAP, the Führer principle also applies in the Bund. Kuhn calls the shots.
So Kuhn begins combining the outward symbols of Nazism with Americanism. So rather than hailing Hitler, for instance, they used the term Free America.
His trademark was perhaps also the many recreational camps he founded all over the USA, not only on the East Coast, but also in California.
Kuhn has life in the camps filmed for promotional purposes.
A majority of the German immigrants lived in cities and maybe in apartment buildings and were of a poorer class than most of the rest of the United States. So for the German American Bund members, this was an opportunity to send your children or to send your family to the fresh air of the countryside during the summer and get out of the cities.
Tens of thousands of boys and girls spend their vacations in these camps.
So this is now the heyday of the Bund. Kuhn is enjoying the power he has gathered. He's enjoying the fact that he has a nationwide system of camps that he's setting up. He's enjoying being pictured in the tabloids in New York City. There's one puzzle piece missing for Kuhn, though, in mid-1936. What does Hitler himself think about this group?
Kuhn decided that they needed to get the official blessing from Germany in order to continue. So they decided to go to the Berlin Olympics in 1936, Hitler's Olympics, as it was known.
Hitler puts on a good propaganda show in 1936. He tries to meet with as many foreign delegations as possible to humanize himself. He tries to shake as many hands. Kuhn takes advantage of this and sets up a meeting with Hitler to deliver him this charitable contribution to the Reich's Winter Help Fund.
Before the agreed meeting, Bundists march along Unter den Linden. Afterwards, they proceed to the Reich Chancellery.
They were ushered into Hitler's office, Kuhn and some of his top people, and they presented Hitler with the Golden Book and their donation to the Winter Fund. And this was to be Fritz Kuhn's shining moment. Shook hands, picture was taken.
Now, what's interesting about this photo is that unlike most of Hitler's photos that are very carefully staged and he strikes a pose, we actually only see half of Hitler. We only see sort of the right half of his body, and it looks like almost a paparazzi-style snapshot. This is fundamentally a defeat for Kuhn. Of course, he would have loved to have a stage photo with Hitler or even been presented in some official context as the leader of the future American Reich or something outlandish like that. But this again, I think, shows Kuhn's marketing genius here. He has at least some tangible piece of evidence. He's got a photograph with Hitler. Kuhn comes back to the United States, runs this across the front page of his newspaper. Other newspapers, of course, pick this up.
Kuhn claims that Hitler commissioned him to continue the fight in America.
The US government is actually deeply concerned about this. Meeting with Hitler is certainly a pretty bold move for an American citizen to make, which of course Kuhn is at this point. The State Department begins investigating Kuhn, see what Kuhn's intentions really are.
There was much anger in Berlin, too. Diplomats from the Foreign Office are furious. How could Hitler have allowed himself to be photographed with Kuhn? Hitler justifies himself, saying he did it during the Olympics, as he did with many others. This does not reassure the diplomats.
What if Roosevelt decides to expel the German ambassador, or even potentially start a war over the Bund's activities? I think there's a great deal of ambiguity in terms of how the Reich reacts to this. They're not entirely sure what to make of Kuhn. Is he simply a showboat emulator of Hitler? Is this a man who has real political influence?
Hitler plays the tactician. Officially, he's distanced himself from the Bund. Unofficially, he's allowed high NSDAP functionaries to contact Kuhn. Kuhn continues to dissimulate.
We don't get any orders or any money from Germany. We're American citizens, and we demand our rights to be American citizens.
They march through the streets of New York with the Nazi flags, in goose-stepping, in formation.
All over America, new chapters form.
It looked scary. It was intimidating, which is what they wanted to do. They wanted to frighten people.
John Metcalf also marches undercover through New York, doing the goose step.
Metcalf has a very abrupt career in the German-American Bund, and he actually meets Fritz Kuhn himself, and Kuhn is favorably impressed with Metcalf. This is a man who knows how to write reports. Of course, what Kuhn doesn't know is that he's a professional reporter. He seems to be loyal as far as the Bund can tell, and so he very quickly becomes Kuhn's right-hand man.
Kuhn's first assignment for Metcalf, he is to visit all the chapters.
Kuhn's idea is that Metcalf is going to provide him with intelligence as to what's going on with these far-flung chapters. Are they actually buying their uniforms? Are they actually paying their dues? Are they actually sending their dues to New York?
Metcalf, the undercover journalist, thus gains insight into the world of the Bundists.
What Metcalf very quickly finds is that the Bund is a complete hodgepodge. There are some membership chapters that apparently don't even bother to collect dues. There are some that haven't bought the regulated uniforms or have modified them in certain ways. But Metcalf also discovers, though, there's a very different set of expectations among Bund members nationwide.
Some chapters are in close contact with other extremist U.S. groups, such as the Ku Klux Klan.
What all Bund chapters have in common is anti-Semitism, anti-communism, and this view that in the future German Americans are going to in some way rise up.
They had something that they talked about called Der Tag, which meant the day. And this would be the day that they would rise up and defeat the Jews in America.
In some places, Metcalf finds that the Bund is ready for action immediately. What Metcalf also hears, and this is what troubles him particularly, is they don't necessarily think that Fritz Kuhn is going to be the man who seizes power.
Rumors are circulating that a famous U.S. American will soon take over the Bund. Charles Lindbergh, the transatlantic flyer and self-confessed Hitler admirer.
And what Metcalf realizes is the Bund is really the kernel of a future movement. It's not the movement itself. He sees it as building towards something even bigger.
Metcalf decides to go public.
Metcalf's scoop finally hits in the Daily Time. So it runs under the headline, Secrets of Nazi Army in USA, by Timesman who joined it. It's a sensational scoop, and in the days to come, actually, Metcalf's stories get picked up by a ton of newspapers across the country. This becomes a national story overnight.
After the stories were out and Dad was out lecturing about his experiences in the Bund, he was driving to the next town that he was going to give the lecture in. Somebody shot at him, and it was rapid fire, so we assumed that it was some kind of an automatic weapon. But it was aimed at the car, and Dad just drove as fast as he could and got away.
Metcalf will not be intimidated. In uniform, he addresses all Americans.
One of the most disturbing things I found in the American Nazi movement was the Hitlerizing of American boys and girls.
He sees that these camps are not all about having a good time in the summer. He sees children doing hard work, training with weights, being forced to do manual labor. And the Bund explains this, or he's told by the camp's leadership, that this is about making strong young German.
There was one teenager who was a leader of the girls. Her name was Tilly Koch. She stood outside the girls' bunks at night. Now, it was cold, and it was rainy. She caught pneumonia, and they refused to take her to a doctor. They said, no, you're a strong German young woman. You don't get sick. And Tilly Koch died.
The key to Metcalf's articles, I think, is that it wakes Americans up to the fact that fascism can happen on their own soil. This is not just a European problem or a European phenomenon. There are groups planning it in the United States itself.
The Un-American Activities Committee becomes aware of the Bund and summons Fritz Kuhn. He claims innocence and complains of being unjustly labeled public enemy number 1.
Kuhn was grilled for 2 days. And at the end, he said, "Are we done?" They said, "Yes, you are dismissed." Kuhn stood up and said, "Gentlemen, it has been a pleasure."
So in the aftermath of this increasing pressure from the US government and from the American public, Kuhn plans his largest demonstration to date.
The president's brief statement was
The Bund rents Madison Square Garden in New York. Kuhn and his supporters ostensibly want to celebrate George Washington's birthday there. 20,000 tickets are sold in advance.
This will be an event that he believes will propel him to the next level of his own fame and his own political power.
100,000 people gather outside to demonstrate against Kuhn.
He claims that if George Washington, this man who is the founding father of the United States in many people's minds, if Washington were alive today, he would certainly be a Nazi.
We, with American ideals, demand that our government shall be returned to the American people who founded it.
He talked about President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, the secret Jew. He talked about Jewish influence in the American government since the founding of the country and how awful it was.
But there's another man there too, whose name is Isidor Greenbaum. Isidor Greenbaum is a plumber's apprentice. He's a Jewish American, and he is there really to show his dislike for the anti-Semitic bile that Kuhn is hurling from this stage. He feels so outraged by these assaults against America's Jews and against the principles of the United States that he feels compelled, he says, to rush the stage.
The OD attacked Greenbaum. They beat him to a bloody pulp. They were kicking him and hitting him, and his pants got ripped off at some point. But the police finally grabbed Greenbaum.
Greenbaum is actually booked for disorderly conduct by the New York City Police Department, but the local Jewish and labor community comes together and bails him out. And there's photos a few days later of him leaving jail and kissing his wife, this sort of newly minted American hero. When the Greenbaum photos are splashed across most of the major papers in the country the next day, it really becomes this galvanizing moment, I think, where Americans can no longer ignore that this is an organization that is intrinsically violent.
You couldn't get Kuhn on freedom of speech. He had the right to be obnoxious. But there had to be another way to get him. They decided to look at the taxes.
Investigators check the Bund's finances and make a discovery. Kuhn is paying his mistress's private bills from the organization's coffers.
Now they had a case against Fritz Kuhn. Embezzlement. And this is what led to the downfall of Fritz Kuhn. Not his Nazism, not his obnoxious speeches. He couldn't keep his pants zipped.
On December 6, 1939, Kuhn is sentenced to 2.5 years in prison for forgery and embezzlement. This also seals the fate of the Bund. Without a leader, it becomes meaningless. People in Berlin are relieved.
It's said that Joachim von Ribbentrop, the German foreign minister, remarks to Hitler that after Kuhn's trial, Kuhn is finished, that his career essentially is over.
Fritz Kuhn is deported to Germany a few months after the end of the Second World War. His American citizenship had already been revoked. A German civilian court handling denazification initially sentences him to 10 years in prison. The sentence is later reduced to 2 years. When the sentence is pronounced, Kuhn declares with a grin that he will never found an organization again.
I think Fritz Kuhn was a major threat to the United States. His combination of the symbols of Nazism and Americanism represented perhaps the boldest attempt of the time to argue that Americans had nothing to fear from Nazism.
He was the most incongruous threat you can imagine, but he was loud. And he said a lot of scary things. And in America, if you're loud and you say a lot of scary things, people have a way of paying attention.
Fritz Kuhn died lonely and impoverished in Munich in 1951. The New York Times reported his death as a marginal note only months later. John Metcalf continued to work as a journalist, consultant, and speechwriter.
Years later, I thought I should say something. I was on the phone to my mother, and I said, "Would you do me a favor and tell Dad something? Tell him how proud I am of what he's done in his life." And she did. And then she called me back a few days later and said that he almost cried.